All right, guys, we're back with another episode. Today I have a very special guest. This is Annan, and he used to have schizophrenia but cured himself, and this is what led him to believe what he believes today. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, good morning, Vitelli, and to your listening audience and viewing audience. So, I was diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder in about my mid 20s, about the age of 25 to 26. So, I think going back into my past a little bit is a good way to talk about how I got to that point. I was baptized as Greek Orthodox, so I attended Greek Orthodox Sunday school when I was younger, probably about the age of 6 or 7 or so. And then I attended a Methodist Sunday school. And then as a teenager in high school, I was participating in a Roman Catholic youth group, even though I was not Roman Catholic. So I always had this notion of religion as part of my upbringing. And I would not say that my parents were dogmatic in any sense of the word. I later discovered that my father used to drop me off at the Greek Orthodox Sunday school. I thought he was upstairs in the church attending the Mass, but apparently I found out later he was out shopping for household supplies while the kids were in Sunday school. So with this religious upbringing, we're exposed to the human being of years ago named Jesus Christ that we're all aware of in Christianity. And as a young child at the time, say 4 or 5 years old, you're like a sponge. You're absorbing everything. And I took it that Jesus Christ was this role model that we were supposed to somehow emulate if we could in some way, shape, or form. And there's various interpretations to what emulating this role model really means. Does it mean being good? Does it mean being generous? Does it mean being kind? So there's multiple interpretations about what Jesus Christ's mission actually was, and what he was supposed to be teaching humanity or bringing to us. And I did the usual things of like coloring Noah's Ark, just like the Old Testament and the New Testament. But at the same time, I was growing up in a rather dysfunctional family household, and I didn't realize it at the time. There was drug abuse, there was a lot of narcissism, there was death in my family. So I wouldn't say that we were at poverty level, but we were probably lower middle class. At times we were struggling. So I had a relative who kind of thought it was funny to push drugs on on me and other aspects of other people in my family. So at the age of 7 years old, I was already exposed to like marijuana. I grew up around bags of pills and cocaine. I remember holding a brick of hash in my hands before I was even a teenager. So the drugs were all around me, but there was a higher voice in me saying, be aware of this, see an environment, but don't partake in it. Now, I would go back and forth because, I had this role model in my family that was kind of pushing this stuff on me. I was offered a drug dealership, I think, several times in high school. Cocaine was all around. Now, I never actually did cocaine. I was offered it a few times. I think the only time I actually even had any awareness of it was when I put a little bit on my gum just to taste it, just to see kind of what it looked like, the same way a police officer would test it for purity. And I remember it had a very sodium chemical like taste to it. So I just felt like it wasn't something that I wanted to snort up my nose at the time. So needless to say, I grew up in an environment where there were a lot of drugs going on. This was like the early to mid 1970s. So there's a lot going on with the drug scene. And I participated a little bit in it, but I tried to I still wanted my wits about me. I wanted my mind for future use. So there were a lot of times where it was pushed upon me and I was called all sorts of names and everything if I didn't participate in it. And then I was dealing with this notion of keeping my grades up in school because, like I said, I wanted my mind for future use. So I had this duality growing up where there was drugs going on in the household, but I valued my education because I felt like that was the way to get out of it. So what's the word? Cognitive dissonance, I think is the kind of buzzword for that, where you're kind of in this split state of awareness. I mean, here I am. I'm keeping my grades up. I'm doing pretty well in school. But at the same time, I knew anywhere to get drugs within 24 hours if I ever wanted or needed them. So it was a lifestyle that I was trying to kind of fight against. And I went off to college. I pursued a degree in mechanical engineering. And I took some psychology courses. as electives. I took general psychology, comparative psychology, and abnormal psychology. And then when I got out of college, I kind of had some time to myself to kind of reflect on things. And I wanted to read the Bible on my own without that third party middle person interpreting it for you, just see what it said, see what I thought it said, to interpret it the way it needed to apply in my life. And I guess strange things started happening as I started to do that. I was going inward to kind of figure out who I was and where I wanted to go. And there was so much going on at the time. I think a lot of suppressed emotions from my dysfunctional childhood were catching up to me, suppressed emotions. And it was a variety of things going on. So I remember I was reading the Bible, and I started to have, there were times where I felt very euphoric while reading the certain aspects of scriptures. And then I started to kind of get very down. Like something was telling me how worthless I was, how I had no sense of value to the world, I had nothing to offer. And this started to progress more and more and more. And at the same time, I was trying to like come up with a model in my head of how the universe works. So aspects of it were very manic, aspects of it were very depressive. So you could say there's probably a little bipolar going on at the same time. But I remember I kept seeing patterns of circles and triangles in both an abstract and physical sense.
Like a hallucination, like a physical hallucination?
I wouldn't say so much that, but more like the inner workings of the mind kept showing me patterns of that. I was trying to interpret what this was, and I guess years later, I've learned this is referred to as sacred geometry. It's like the emanations of what these various symbols mean in life and what they stand for. Now, at the time that I was reading the Bible, I wasn't into any of the occult stuff growing up as a kid. I wasn't reading anything I didn't know what the occult word even meant. I mean, I came with this pretty much a standard generic Christian background. The notion of being a good person, doing the best you can. But I was kind of facing a bit of a life crisis there, reaching my mid-20s, trying to figure what direction I wanted to go and who I was as a person. And I remember, as I said, I kept seeing patterns of circles and triangles in everything and everywhere. And what happened is I actually ended up making this. This was made back in 1989. I made it out of kind of cardboard and balsa wood. It's actually become a talisman, or what somebody could refer to as a sunthemata, spelled Sunthemata. And this symbol, it kind of became something for me to focus on when I was facing difficult times in life. It became a beacon of hope in my life to kind of pull me out of what I was in. And I kept seeing it in my mind. So I've actually had that hanging up on my wall since I made it in 1989. And it's kind of given me hope throughout some tough times in my life.
So that's exactly what you saw in your mind. Was it like flashing every now and then, and you just picture it all the time?
It was probably visions of it, but it was probably like thoughts telling me to make this, to create this.
Interesting.
And then I was like sorting through, what God was about. I was trying to determine how the universe works. I was confused. What is God? What is the definition of God? Why are there multiple paths to God? Why are there all these religions out there? Look at all the sects of Christianity that we have out there, Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopalian. And I remember at the time, though, I felt like I was starting to kind of fight something internally. It was like internal battles going on, like, the devil on one side of the shoulder, and the angel on the other, going back and forth, back and forth. And it almost felt like something was trying to enter me or take over my personality. I mean, I was a pretty good kid growing up. I wasn't a real troublemaker or anything like that. And these thought forms, whatever they were kind of telling me that was a waste of time to be a good person, that you need to be a little more devilish, so to speak. And as these internal battles kept occurring, I started to kind of lose my identity of who I was. And it was strange because there were times I remember that my arms and legs would move, and I swear I wasn't the one moving them.
So you were disassociated a little and you weren't sure what was going on. You were kind of like a passenger in your own body.
Exactly, exactly. I kind of went into a state of the split mind where part of me was the participant dealing with all this stuff, and the other part of me was the observer or the scientist watching what was going on. Because I'd taken, as I mentioned, I'd taken comparative psychology, excuse me, abnormal psychology in college. So I was very aware of the diagnostic statistical manual that psychologists use to classify certain mental illnesses. And then here I am starting to have these mental illnesses at an extreme. And I was thinking to myself at the time, like, wow, I know the college textbooks of psychology say one thing about this stuff, but this feels like an attempted possession, like something was trying to take me over. So I had this logical, rational mind being in engineering, and I had the scientific, or what the current science says about mental illnesses and psychology. And then here it is, I'm trying to undergo some of these experiences. I'm saying, this is absurd. There's more to this than what these textbooks are saying. So I kept having feelings of being worthless. I was becoming suicidal, and it was kind of getting worse and worse and worse. I was having very strong thoughts, almost like I was in some sort of spiritual battle or confrontation was going on in my head or my mind. And it wasn't just a battle in my head for just my sake. I kind of felt like I was acting as a representative or an advocate for humanity. And I'll talk more about that later on in the interview. So I was put on lithium at the time to try and kind of stabilize what was ever going on. I was unemployed. I was dealing with a lot of codependency issues that occurred in my family, and I started to just like crash. I would say I felt like I was reaching the point where I was no longer sleeping. I almost felt like my mind was up for like a full week, and by up I mean like I would close my eyes to go to sleep at night, but I wasn't actually getting that deep sleep state. I was always kind of very aware of what was going on. So I felt like I wasn't sleeping. It was getting worse and worse. There was a lot of anxiety going on. I'd say depression, panicking. And it reached a point, I remember my body was kind of starting to thrash all over the place. My arms and legs were moving. My feet were moving. My legs were moving. And I would try and speak sometimes, and I couldn't get the words out. Like something was taking control of my vocal cords. So I remember I would try and say something, and the words would just come out as a slur or like I couldn't say the words. And so when my body started thrashing all over the place, I was rushed to the emergency room. They at first thought I might have been a lithium overdose. And I'll be honest, I was so depressed at that point in time, I probably wasn't taking even enough lithium. That's what they had me on. I remember I was seeing in black and white. I was no longer eating. I just felt like I wasn't worthy or deserving of eating. So I was sent to the emergency room. They diagnosed it that it was mental, not physiological. So I was sent to a psychiatric hospital, Princeton House in New Jersey, to be specific. I spent about 4 weeks in there. Now, during my time there, I actually had a point in time where I was hearing outside audible voices for about 48 hours. It seemed to be a cacophony of men's, women's, and children's voices. Now, they may have been talking about me. I don't really know because I tried to not listen to them or disregard them. But it was almost like if you're ever in a movie theater before a show's about to start and you hear everybody having all the private conversations on cell phones or talking to family members. It was almost like that. There's multiple conversations going on. And I was trying to kind of block them out. Now, the thing about when you're sent to a psychiatric hospital and given the diagnosis of one of the schizophrenic classifications, you give all these pills and medicines to try and snap you out of it. And you're basically a human guinea pig because they don't know which ones work on you. And the side effects are awful of some of those medications. I remember very dry mouth where the point almost not swallow. I remember a few days just being totally out of it where I have no memories of what went on just from those medications. They're tranquilizers. They're not solving the problem. They're just calming your external expression to the world, but all that internal stuff is still going on. So then they resorted to ECT during my final week to stay in psychiatric hospital, which is electroconvulsive therapy. That's where they will actually put the electrodes on your scalp and give your brain a slight jolt of electricity. Now, this would have been about the fall of 1990. So it was a little bit more humane than how it was back in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. What they did is they gave you a muscle relaxant because when they apply the voltage, you can have seizures, you can break arms, and rip tendons just from the shock and seizures that your body can go through. They give you anesthesia to kind of knock you out. So it's like almost going to surgery. And they have to put you on a respirator because the muscle relaxants are so strong that you can no longer move the diaphragm up and down to breathe. And I remember they even put like the links, they cuff you in too to keep you from thrashing. So my stay in the psychiatric hospital, I mean, it was part hell, part heaven. I mean, there were some people in there that I felt were compassionate, were generally trying to help. Some of the nurses were great. Some of the doctors, not so sure. And it's not a place that anybody wants to end up because you feel like, oh, that's my life is ruined. How am I ever going to fix or repair myself from here? But I remember the electroconvulsive therapy, the ECT, I felt better after the very first treatment. It was almost like prior to that, my mind was so full of noise that I couldn't think for myself. And I was going back and forth whether this noise or these voices or these very strong thoughts were actually my mind internally doing this or something coming from external on the outside. So I kept going back and forth with that. I couldn't really figure it out. So the ECT worked, at least temporarily. It did calm those voices and very strong thoughts. I felt like I was getting back more to my normal self and who I was. So I was released from the psychiatric hospital and I was kind of on outpatient treatment. I was assigned both to psychologists and psychiatrists. One was to prescribe medications. The other was to act as a counselor. Now, they put me on a low dose of Klonopin at the time. And I mean, I hated being on any type of medicine. I'm the type of person that likes to feel like I'm in full control of my faculties. So I was trying to do what I could to get off of it because it doesn't make you feel like yourself. And they're just kind of tranquilizers. And there are long-term effects on the brain. I mean, they do damage the brain with the long-term usage. So after I was released, I started to encounter these voices much more intensely. They came back. And it was odd because here it was, I was reading about Jesus' life in the New Testament a little bit prior to all this stuff happening. And then I had this very strong thought or voice making this offer of mammon. It was showing me a path to extreme riches, wealth, power, fame. It was basically offering me the riches of this world, but I had to, in essence, sell my soul to it, or give up on what direction I wanted to head in life or what I wanted to do. And I'm this. I mean, I knew I was mad at the time when I was going through this stuff because I'm like, this is not rational reality. I knew I just read the New Testament kind of more intensely about a year or so earlier, and then I'm starting to have these experiences mimicking sort of what Christ went through. You know, this idea of offering of riches of this world to give up your soul or a life mission. And so, yeah, I knew that I was mad at the time going through this stuff. But anyhow, this very strong thought or voice kept making me this offer, and I turned it down. It was difficult because I was in a broken state. I mean, I was unemployed at the time. I was going into debt. I was having to deal with the diagnosis of affective schizophrenic disorder. I was trying to get started in my career and my life, and I really couldn't get started in that. So dealing with all these mental illness issues, so to speak. But it was definitely a Faustian bargain. And these attacks continued on. I would almost call them stages. They were like a tribunal that was occurring. Now, I couldn't tell if it was coming from one voice or multiple voices. But each stage of these attacks, the general vocabulary used seemed to change. So I felt like I was almost going up a managerial hierarchy. with whatever it was that I was encountering or dealing with. So should I just keep talking? I'm just telling my story here. I don't know if you have
No,
any
no, keep
questions.
doing. Yeah, I want to hear from the beginning. This is good.
Okay. So those attacks probably lasted about a month and a half or so. And I'm seeing a counselor at the time, and I'm primarily focused on some codependency issues I had with my mother, trying to break away from that because my father had passed away in my arms when I was about 13, and I kind of took on being the head of the household to deal with all the stuff that was going on. Now, I didn't tell my counselor that I was having these very strong thoughts. I was only giving her the tip of the iceberg because I didn't want to be put on harder drugs. I didn't want to be tranquilized even more so. I felt, although this was a spiritual battle that I was enduring, and I had to face it head on. So when I was going through this time, I mean, I stayed away from all recreational drugs. I didn't even touch alcohol because I knew my mind was not in the right state. I didn't want to add more chemicals in my head to what I was dealing with because I felt like that one had to be a so-called spiritual warrior and face this stuff head on. And I mentioned that stage where I was offered the riches of this world. I kind of gave up my soul to it. And I said no. And the next stage of tribunal, it was kind of extreme guilt. It started pulling out every flaw in my character, including, and it was using my own morality against me. It would make me feel extreme guilt, trying to almost like make me end my existence. It was encouraging me to commit suicide. And sometimes it would come very dramatic ways of doing so. I remember one very strong thought or voice kept saying, climb up a high voltage electrical tower and jump into the wires. Kill yourself that way.
Wow.
I mean, very, very dramatic at the times.
So these are the voices telling you things like, "Oh, we'll give you riches, we can give you wealth, power." Is this the voices directly telling you, or is it like thoughts?
At the time, I was going back and forth because I really couldn't tell if this was something internal of me or external of me. I was going back and forth. I was on the fence. So at times there were strong thoughts. At times there were actual audible voices. My mind was going back and forth on how to interpret what was going on. Because keep in mind, I'm fighting against this,
Oh.
and my whole state of reality is gone, and my reality has been distorted by what was going on. So I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust what was going on with these voices, or I kept going back and forth. So I call them very strong thoughts for now, just because I know when I was in the psychiatric hospital, the voices were very audible, like they're coming externally of me. And I almost think it was something external trying to make me think that it was my own thoughts doing this. But I don't believe it was after what I went through.
And that's them basically offering you, basically making a bargain with you, right, to give up your life's mission or where you were headed for something else, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah, to kind of sell one's soul to it. Say, hey, we'll give you all this stuff, but we get your soul, that type
That's
of thing.
interesting that the voices or spirits, whatever people want to call these things, that they tempt you at your lowest, kind of like Jesus was tempted at his lowest when he was fasting for 40 days and he was weak, and the devil tempted him at his very lowest.
Oh, absolutely, because that's when you're most vulnerable, and that's when I think the core of who you really are will show itself.
Yep, that's
Our true humanity comes out in times of crisis.
oh
Do
yeah.
we end up being compassionate, or do we end up taking advantage of people?
Our true character comes out.
Definitely. So these voices started to make me feel extreme guilt. I mean, it would bring up my own thoughts in my own head using against me. For example, I used to go fishing as a kid, and you bait the hook with an earthworm, you cast it out there. And these very strong thoughts, or audible hallucinations, if you want to call them that, would tell me, see, you're a horrible being. You killed that earthworm and you caught the fish and you ate it for lunch type of thing. And so it's almost using my own morality against me, the idea that, oh, we eat other animals for sustenance. And it listed every morsel of meat that I ever ate, every fly or ant that I ever had killed as a kid. You go through that stage when you're 3 or 4, you might step on a few ants, and later on in life you realize, ooh, I don't need to do that. It's not a nice thing to do. But I remember that it was actually showing me snapshots. the times in my life when I had done those things. I've actually seen the vision of myself doing that.
Wow.
So I started arguing against these very strong thoughts. And in regards to like the eating of meat, I defended myself. I said, God created me with teeth, tongue, and mouth. Do I not have the right to use them? I said, why is meat made to taste flavorful and provides the most amount of proteinic energy per volume? I said, why does God encourage some animals to kill and eat other animals for sustenance? We're human beings. We're animals too. I said, take your arguments to God, not to me. I didn't create this world this way. You can't blame me for what's going on. And I mean, I still deal with this to this day. Is it rightful or not rightful to eat meat? I mean, it's a tough dilemma that we face because we do understand that other creatures suffer when we slaughter them. And at the same time, I think we need certain proteins that, in part of a diet, that aren't available with just being a vegan or going pure plant diet. So there were various trials and tribulations that kept occurring. I don't know how many of them. There could have been 5, 7, or 9. This was approaching going from winter 1991 to spring of 1991. But I remember the next prosecution was attacked. I would call these prosecutors. I mean, they were. So what I'm looking for, kind of what Satan does, the antagonizer,
Accuser.
the accuser. That's what I was dealing with here. And the other part is like, oh my gosh, this is the stuff that religions talk about, and scriptures talk about. And here I am going through this. This is nuts. That's the way I was kind of viewing it. But a part of me was like, there's something more to this. So the next trial of tribulation, the adversary. That's the word I was looking for. These thoughts were acting as adversaries. So the next prosecuting very strong thought or audible hallucination kept saying how worthless I and humanity are. It kept saying there were insignificant lumps of flesh destined to rotting, being eaten by bacteria and worms.
Wow.
And I would counter argue against them. Sometimes I would actually speak out loud. Sometimes I would speak in my head back to them. I said, we didn't decide the composition of our flesh, blood, and bones. It was granted and forced upon us. We didn't create our body or form. I said in defense of this prosecution, this adversary, I said, how can you condemn our form when we had no say or control over its creation? I said, take your arguments to God. That you'll find the answers. Don't put it on me. And I remember it was really interesting because this prosecuting attack, it backed off rather quickly. A lot of these stages went on for like a month and a half or so. This was only a week and a half. And I realized that, wow, my defense was pretty strong in that one. It didn't have a case. So it backed away, like it withdrew its stance. So there were a whole bunch of these different trials and tribulations going on. At times it would show me how horrible humanity is and that they don't deserve to exist. And it would show me all the horrors of war throughout the centuries. And some of the visions, I've actually seen the visual hallucination, like almost like a screen or cinematic movie projection shot, like you're watching a theater of this stuff going on in my mind. It would show me both stuff that I had seen throughout history and reading newspapers, watching television and movies and documentaries. But it was also pulling out stuff that I'd never seen before. So it was using my thoughts against me, but pulling out somewhere else to show me, to tell me, see, humanity is worthless. They don't deserve to exist as a species. And I would counter argue against them. I would defend humanity from these attacks. I would say, yes, there's some human beings that are full of hatred, anger, think always only of themselves. I said there are others, however, that are kind, compassionate, caring, loving. I said you don't judge an entire species, culture, race, or religion based on the actions or aspects of the few. So I said humanity should not be condemned just because there's some out there that are evil or bad or wicked or lack compassion. In other words, there's enough good seed in humanity for our species to continue to exist. So there were a bunch of other trials and tribulations that kept going on. So I kept being attacked, trying to defend humanity and back and forth. And at times I would start to agree with them. Other times I wouldn't. And they would say things like, if you ever tell anybody about us, they'll just lock you up as a lunatic. You'll be drugged up and tranquilized the rest of your life. And they were probably correct on that. Because, I mean, you have these experiences. Who do you tell about them without thinking that you're a total lunatic? You know, I didn't know whether to go to a priest, a rabbi. I didn't want to tell my counselor about this because I didn't know what was going to occur. So I kept this stuff bottled up in me. I talked about a good 20 or 30 years or so. So finally, I reached a point where I was so exhausted from all these internal battles, trials, and tribulations. I'd been diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder about a year earlier. I was unemployed, trying to get on with my life, dealing with some past dysfunctionalities in my family. I mean, my psyche was cracked and broken. I was dealing with trauma that I encountered, had been repressed. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on simultaneously. It's like I was waking up, but it was all happening at once. So I put my brain and mind on overload. So it was definitely a psychotic break, for lack of a better word. So I had mentioned that I reached my wit's end. This is about the fall of 1991 now. I was diagnosed having affective schizophrenic disorder about a year earlier. I'm unemployed. My income that year was below poverty level, going into the debt. I'm psychologically exhausted, dealing with all this. I'm trying to get started in my life. I didn't know if this was just some madness in my head or is there something more profound going on. So I started to pray to the highest essence of God that I could. I was saying, God, give me a sign. I need a sign to give me proof that this is not some mental illness going on in my head. There's something more legitimate going on. I need to know, are you there? And prior to praying, to resorting to finally praying to God, the final stage of tribulation that I was facing, these audible hallucinations, very strong thoughts or voices started to tell me that God doesn't exist. Give it up. There's nothing more to your existence than just your material atoms, molecules in your body. There's nothing beyond this world. Your life is pointless. You're just made up of random molecules with nothing, and you're nothing more than that. And part of me didn't want to accept that. So that's why I started to pray. I prayed to God. I said, God, give me a sign. Give me a sign that there's something more going on here. Give me a sign that you're there. Give me a sign that there's something more to meaning than just our material existence during our lifetime here. That there is something greater and beyond our current reality of what we see in this world. Now, I didn't care what the sign was. I never asked for specifics. I was leaving up to God to let me know. I just knew when I had a sign that I would know that was it. If a priest showed up my door to talk to me, I would have accepted that as a sign. You know, if a Bible arrived in the mail by mistake, the wrong address, I would have accepted that as a sign. It didn't have to be anything outrageous. It's just some indicator there's something going on. Well, something much more profound occurred, and to this day it still resonates within me. I had a vision, or you could call it a visual hallucination, but it's the nature of it that I find to be the mystery. So I mentioned I've been praying to God so intensely about 2 weeks, and then I woke up about 2 or 3 o'clock one night in the morning with the feeling that there was a presence in my room. Now, I actually have a slideshow presentation that I can provide to your audience to show what it is that I saw, what it is that a schizophrenic saw as a visual hallucination. Okay.
So these are sketches of what you experienced during that time at 3 a.m. when you woke up, basically.
Correct. After praying to God for about 2 weeks to give me a sign that you exist, to give me a sign that there was something more going on in my head than just sheer madness. So I woke up with the feeling that there was a presence in my room. And this is the room, pretty much what the room looked like of my childhood growing up. There's a closet to the right. There's like a little jut out by the light switch on the left there. Did my slide change? Do you see kind of a square?
Yep.
Okay. That's actually a ceiling light fixture in my room. So I was lying in bed on my back looking up, and I felt like there was something in the room. It was very intense. I didn't see it. I looked around. I wasn't seeing anything. But I knew I was still in my room because I could see the square ceiling light fixture above my head. Next thing I know, I start to see kind of this haze or smoke start coming into the room. And it was occurring to the left of the light fixture. And at first I thought it was smoke, like there was an electrical fire going on in the light fixture. But I realized that's not where the wires go into the light fixture. And the smoke wasn't coming from the ceiling. It was coming out of a plane about 6 inches or a foot below the level of the ceiling. So it wasn't actually occurring on the ceiling, it was occurring at a level slightly below the ceiling. And I'm watching it and I'm thinking to myself, oh, great. This is a visual hallucination. Here it was, I was diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder about a year ago. And now I'm starting to have a visual hallucination because I realized this is not normal reality. This shouldn't be happening. And this smoke or fog or cloud-like substance, it wasn't moving the way smoke does. Like smoke would come into a room and tend to go upwards because of the heat within it. This was moving almost like the way, if you ever drop food coloring into a glass of water,
Uh-huh.
it's got like a fluid flow. This was moving like that, like a very fluidic flow. I
Interesting.
don't know if it had essence of itself. Part of me was a little frightened. It's like, this is not normal. But the other part of my mind, the scientist, the observer, said, let me see where this goes. I'm a so-called schizophrenic. I'm having a visual hallucination now. I've never had one before in my life until this time. I wanted to see what my mind was going to show me. So I'm watching it. More and more of it's coming into the room. And I start to see this kind of dark portal in the center of this cloud that's forming my room. It was kind of oblong and oval shaped. At least it was getting that way. It was getting larger and larger and larger. And I'm looking into it, and it's pitch black. I don't really see anything, but more and more this fog or cloud is coming forming into the room. The portal's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then as it opens up more, I realized that fog was coming out from the inside circumference of this portal. I could see kind of the foggish like smoke or cloud pouring out along the edges of this opening. I looked into it. It was very black, very dark. I really couldn't see anything going on. It got to be very big. I'm thinking, where's this hallucination going to go? What is my mind going to show me? And all of a sudden, whoosh, I see these two serpentine snake-like tails move from bottom to top within the portal. And I was like, whoa. I'm getting more and more frightened as this is going on because, like I said, this is not normal reality. But at the time, I figured, well, whatever's going on, that there's a creature in there. It's on the other side of the portal. It's not in my room. It's not in my reality. Well, I spoke too soon on that. So I'm watching these snake-like movements in the portal moving around. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, do I have a subconscious fear of snakes that my mind's trying to show me? But I grew up near the woods. I used to hold snakes as a kid with no problem. And one of my college roommates actually had a pet boa constrictor. I used to hold that with no problems or fears. So I knew it wasn't a subconscious fear of snakes. I'm watching it move. I see the tail kind of go by. Now its sides were very black, glossy scale-like, but the bottom was like a grayish underbelly. I remember seeing that as it went from bottom to top from the portal. And more, this cloud is starting to fill the room. It reached a point where the portal was kind of obscured by the cloud, almost like a full moon behind the clouds, where I knew the portal was there, but I couldn't quite see it. It was very solid and dense. And then I started to see the snake-like movements, the serpentine movements within the cloud itself that was in my room. And I realized this entity, whatever it was, that was on the other side of the portal, had now entered my room. I saw it moving around in the cloud, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. I was thinking this thing would come out with its snake-like reptilian head, float around the room a little bit, to go back in the cloud, and that would be the end of it. Well, it reached a point where the cloud was fully dense. I knew something was moving in it because I could see like the fog or whatever it was, or the cloud like moving and fluttering. But for a few seconds, I couldn't actually see the snake-like movements anymore. But I knew it was in there moving around. It's almost like when an airplane goes through a cloud, you see the clouds move. That's kind of what I was seeing, like an object was moving the cloud around. And then this creature pops out of the cloud. It had a mammalian face and a serpentine or worm-like body coming off of it. And I remember there was like a split or a seam down the side of it, almost like it had two spines or two sets of vertebrae coming out of its head. It had kind of like a mane, and it looked like dog-like or lion-like, I would say, from the side when it first came in. It was definitely mammalian. I mean, I could see such details. I could see whiskers on its face. I could see stubble. I could see even skin imperfections in it as well. And I started laughing to myself because I was seeing serpentine movements. I expected the kind of snake to come out of the room with like a snake head on it and a reptilian head on it. And it comes out with this mammalian face on it. I'm like laughing, like, this is pretty freaky looking. So I figured, okay, my mind's gonna probably come out with other weird animals out of that cloud, like a duck on a turtle's body or a frog on a fish body. So I was waiting to see where this goes. Now I started writing a book in recent years to try and deal with some of my religious experiences or this hallucination that occurred. And in my search for God and meaning, I came across this image about 3 years ago. This is referred to as Chinubis, which is actually an Egyptian solar god. So this goes back over 4,000 years ago. And this amulet itself was probably from, second, third, or fourth century AD. But this creature or being is what the Gnostics also referred to as Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, Abraxas, Samuel. I think the Cathars referred to this creature entity as the Rex Mundi. So there's several interpretations of what this is. I don't know if they're accurate or not, but based on my reading, this is what I was discovering. I came across this amulet below from the last few months. It describes a little bit more as an Egyptian Gnostic solar god or icon. It was often on Gnostic gems. And you can see in both the images, there's like a split or a seam down its side, like two separate sets of vertebrae or in its spine.
Just like what you saw, basically identical.
Basically what I saw.
And this was after, right? So you've never seen these images before the hallucination.
I never knew what it was. And keep in mind, when I'm having this hallucination, this is 1991. There's no internet back then. Or it's very much in its infancy. I wasn't reading any books on the occult. I had no knowledge of what Gnosticism. I didn't know what Gnosticism was until about 2 or 3 years ago. I didn't know what the word Chinubis or Abraxas was, or Yaldabaoth until about 2 or 3 years ago. This is all foreign to my vocabulary. Yet this is what I saw in my room, 100% what I saw in my room, that creature flying on the cloud, back around the fall of 1991. So it comes fully into the room, or more into the room, and it faces me head on. And it looked very lion-like from this angle. It looked a little disabled, almost like a mangy cat that had been through some cat fights. I remember I could see kind of scratches on its face. Its left eye appeared to be scratched out, or at least had a scratch on it. It might have even been blind in his left eye. I'm not entirely sure. Now, at first, I was more curious than terrified at this point because it didn't look that ominous to me. I knew this was not normal reality, but I just figured this would fly around and go back in the cloud. So it's facing me head on, and then all of a sudden, the face changes right before my eyes. It goes into something very gruesome looking, hobgoblin like. It looked like a wrinkled old man or hag of decay. I remember its face became very gray and coon like and wrinkled, almost like it was trying to terrify me or scare me to death. It might have been a gatekeeper trying to keep me from going any farther as well. Well, for that split instance, when that face changed, every cell in my body became in a state of horror and fright. I think my whole body just became goosebumps all over it. I thought this thing was going to kill me. I thought this was the end of my existence. I thought I was going to die here. Because I didn't know if this was just a visual hallucination or if this thing had actually materialized in my room. From my standpoint, I felt like it had actually materialized in my room. But I have no way of verifying that. Cell phones with cameras on them weren't around back in 1991. There was no way I could take a picture of it. And I think I was more trying to defend myself against it or save my life than trying to get a picture of it at the time. So I thought it was coming to devour or destroy me. I knew fighting it would have been pointless. This thing was way more powerful than I. It seemed to come from another realm, a different sphere of reality. So a thought came over me, or perhaps the thought was put in me from a higher source. But rather than resist and fight it, I chose to lower my ego and I just projected love onto it. I felt like this was coming to destroy me. I didn't want to die this way in a state of extreme fright. So I flipped my state of being. I just projected pure love onto it. That I felt was the only thing I had to offer it. Because yeah, I could have tried and fight it or defend myself against it, but like I said, it would have been pointless. So I just loved it. I just projected pure love onto it, a positive emotion. The next thing I know, it disappears or pulverizes. And I remember thinking, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm still in my room because I can still see the square ceiling light fixture. I can still see the clouds to the left and the portal that was there. But this creature was no longer coming at me. And I'm like, I survived. What just happened? The next thing I know, there's another entity hovering overhead. And I realized this isn't over. There's more going on. And this entity was very different than the other one. It was a white porcelain, it looked like a white porcelain face mask. It was androgynous, but I kind of felt like it was a feminine nature. Now, I'm not an artist, so I couldn't really draw this face the way I would like to present it, but it was sheer beauty. Undescribable beauty is all that I can say. There was fluttering going on, like these golden wings or wisps were moving in the foreground or just behind it. There might have been 3 pairs of wings, might have been 4 pairs. I don't quite exactly remember, but I just remember they were moving or fluttering almost like energy waves. It looked like there was something going on in the background too, like reality was distorting or changing or fluttering. I remember there were like some golden illuminated strands or wisps behind it that seemed to be kind of releasing or disconnecting or breaking. But I remember this entity seemed not to be aware of me. I was aware of it before it was aware of me. And I remember thinking, I'm a mere human mortal. I shouldn't be seeing this stuff. This is not normal reality. Part of me wanted to run out of the room. The other part of me wanted to look away. So I felt like this was something that was not, that mortal eyes were not supposed to see.
As if like God put a veil over us and we're not supposed to see any of this stuff.
Exactly. Or I think it's too intense for our ape-like brains to properly process and handle it. It puts our psyche on overload.
Oh yeah.
So I'm looking at it. It wasn't aware of my presence, or it could have been a situation where it was something that had been trapped or imprisoned and didn't know it was free yet. There's many different ways of interpreting what was going on. But I just remember that I was aware of it before it was aware of me. Next thing I know, it becomes aware of me. It's almost like it was looking down, then it opened its eyes and looked and saw me. And now we're just staring at each other. The fluttering of its energetic wings is still going on. And we're just looking back and forth at each other. And it was sheer beauty. As I said, I didn't know whether to look away, but part of me felt like this was happening for a reason. It was the most beautiful space I ever saw. Now, I drew its eyes as being solidly dark, but it might have had some whites to its eyes. But I just remember the center of the eyes were very dark and looked like they were pupilless.
Almost reminds me of a alien gray kind of.
Yeah, I've read about this stuff. This seemed different though, because I said it was beautiful looking. It wasn't something that I felt was scary or ugly. It was sheer beauty, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. I was part of my mind was thinking, okay, that previous entity, the lion-like face, turned something very horrible. This is a beautiful looking face. Is this going to do the same thing? Suddenly change into something horrible and come at me too, the way the last entity did? So we're just staring at each other. It might have been 15 to 45 seconds, but I got to tell you, it felt like an eternity. The flooding of the wings is going on. I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen next. I don't know if he was trying to figure out what I was. I don't know if it was judging me. I don't know if it was not sure of where it was. Like I said, it felt like almost like it might have been in captivity and now it's free. And we're looking at each other, and then all of a sudden, it smiles at me. It was such a smile of reassurance. And upon that smile, all of a sudden, I felt this blast of love, joy, ecstasy, erotica come from this new entity that was in my room and just totally washed me over. It was an intense feeling of joy and bliss. And I say erotic not in the strict sexual sense. I'm talking about erotic in the sense of like we're somehow connected or merging with this being. But I felt like it was telling me that everything's going to be okay. I still have much work to be done on me, but I knew that things, this was a turning point. Things were going to be okay. So as it's smiling at me, I remember I even saw dimples form in its face as it smiled. And it was androgynous looking, but I felt like, again, I felt like it was of a feminine nature. And I'm starting to have an out of body experience as I'm feeling this intense projection of love, joy, bliss, ecstasy, erotica come from this entity onto me. And I felt like I was rising out of my body and like I was starting to merge with this beautiful white porcelain like face. And as I'm rising out of my body, merging with this entity, it's going backwards into that portal that formed in the room. And I'm starting to merge with this entity, like almost like we're becoming one. And just as I'm about to 100% merge with this entity and cross over in going through the portal into a different reality, merged as one with this entity at the same time, I fell back to sleep. Or I was put back to sleep, like it was something that I wasn't supposed to have memories of or to be able to see.
Interesting. It almost
So just,
reminds me of biblical descriptions of angels.
oh yeah, there's several different ways of interpreting this stuff. So just as I was about 100% merged with this being and crossed over into the portal, everything went gray, like I was put back to sleep or I fell back to sleep. Now I woke up the next morning, probably about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. I was like, what just happened? What was that? I was in a state of shock for at least 2 weeks after that. And again, this was probably fall of 1991. But that vision, it saved me, or that visual hallucination, that's what you want to call it. Because here it was, I was going through these torments and trials from sort of adversary or prosecutor. And the very final trial was telling me that God doesn't exist, that there's nothing more to your material existence than just your atoms and molecules. And I was praying to God to give me a sign, and I didn't care what the sign was. And this is what happens. So I was trying to process all this. I didn't tell my counselor about any of this stuff for two reasons. I didn't want her telling me, oh, it's just a visual hallucination and nothing more. We need to put you on, increase your medication, put you on harder drugs. Because having this experience was the only thing holding me together at this point in time. It gave me hope again. It kind of indicated that God is real, at least the way I'm interpreting it this. It proved that there's more to our existence than just this material world, that we do have souls, there's something beyond our greater self, so to speak. So that was back in 1991. The last time I had to take any of those tranquilizers for having a diagnosis of schizophrenia was probably 1992 or 1993. And after that vision, I found myself reading a lot on different different books. It's kind of like, you ever seen the movie Close Encounters
Yeah.
of the Third Kind?
Yep.
After they encounter the UFOs, then they could become obsessed with trying to figure it out. What is this stuff going on? So it's kind of what my approach was. But I did it in a healthy manner. So I started reading a lot of books on Christianity, on Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, various different texts of scriptures throughout the years, trying to figure things out a little bit and trying to kind of find out what God is or is not. What is life about? Finding purpose, finding meaning. But I can say this much: that encounter, it saved my life. It proved to me that God exists. It proved to me that we do have souls. That there is meaning for our existence in this world. We have to try to figure out what that meaning is. And how do you interpret this stuff? Like I said, I never saw that entity with the serpentine body or lying dog-like face before in my life. And then with becoming about the internet years later, I started to see this stuff. And again, the first time I even knew about Gnosticism or the word Abraxas or that these different terms, Sephiroth, what's the other one, Seraph, was in the last 3 or 4 years.
No, sorry to interrupt. We have about 10 minutes left.
Sounds good. So needless to say, I'm doing rather well these days. I have a family, I have a career, and I'm probably getting close to retirement age in a few more years. So I figured now I can talk about this stuff. So as part of my journey, my spiritual explorations, I did write a book on this because I wanted to figure things out too. So it's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10. And it's a beefy read. One doesn't read all of it, but it helped me to come to terms with what our purpose is in this world and the various religions and scriptures out there. And there's many ways of interpreting this stuff. Were both those entities one and the same? Two sides of the same coin? Was the first one evil and the second one good? Were they two entirely separate different entities? The Gnostics talk about this stuff, where the first entity that came into the room is considered Yaldabaoth, the demiurge. The second entity could have been Sophia, our higher self, our holy guardian angel, a future version of ourself. But these were definitely non-corporeal entities. They could have been, the first entity could have been from what they call the Klipot, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is from Kabbalah, the tree of life. That's the other side of the tree of life. The second entity with the horse and ivy mask face could have been a Sephiroth from the tree of life. So various religious scriptures throughout the years have tried to interpret this stuff. I don't know if their interpretations are absolutely 100% correct. These, for all we know, these could just be various non-corporeal species that exist in reality that dwell in the sea of consciousness. Sometimes they attack us, hurt us, torment us. Sometimes they become our adversaries. Other times they're trying to help us, to heal us. So I do feel like there's some sort of spiritual war going on out there. I don't know the specifics and the details of what's going on, but all that I can say is after having that encounter, there's something going on. We just don't know the real specifics of what it is. Anybody that claims that they know 100%, I wouldn't necessarily believe them because I think we're not quite sure. But I think the best thing we can do is just try and be a good human being, get to know who we are as each unique individual that we become as we grow and mature. And I have a website. It's astroxrising.com.
I'll put the links down below.
Okay.
Yep.
But it gives a place for somebody to kind of look into the book, see if they're interested in reading it. It's available in paperback and electronic format. And writing the book has helped me to discover some of these things and to figure out more the meaning of our existence and what God is or is not, what he or she is all about. Multiple different interpretations of reality and religion and scriptures out there, but we have to learn to accept them all without resorting to violence. Because no one knows for sure what the right path is, the correct path. I think there's multiple paths to reach the Godhead. Each one has the freedom and right to choose which path works for them. But we have to respect other people's paths in their search for life, meaning in God as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely willing to hear everyone out. My personal view is the only path to God is through Jesus Christ. But I'm willing to hear out everybody because I believe that the truth will stand regardless. If I question my beliefs or other people's beliefs, I think eventually the truth is going to stand, regardless of anything. Another thing I always wonder if when people have these terrifying experiences and then have a positive one, I've always wondered, is this from the same kind of realm? Like kind of in a way, causing some people to have a spiritual Stockholm syndrome where you, in a way, fall in love with your oppressor. You ever thought about that?
Oh, certainly. Like I said, I'm still undetermined whether that snake-like entity was something evil or if it was something that's trying to teach and train me. There's a Buddhist saying that your enemy is your greatest teacher. And if I was facing an adversary, the projection of love was the way to encounter or deal with that adversary.
The Bible actually says to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. So even the Bible says you can learn from your enemy and think like your enemy. It's like if you were the devil, how would you attack yourself?
And symbols can have multiple meanings. Sometimes they contradict. I mean, look at the swastika. Prior to the era of Nazis, it was considered a symbol of well-being and harmony. Yeah. And then the Nazis hijacked it and made it a symbol of oppression and hatred and horror.
Yeah, it's a very common symbol. It's found in every culture. Slavic, it's found in Jewish mythologies.
Greek, even I think some of the indigenous Americans as well.
Yeah, some say it represents like the Fibonacci sequence, the spiral.
The Ouroboros in a sense.
Yeah, basically.
So it's a busy universe out there. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, it's incredibly loud, incredibly colorful. I mean, seeing is not believing. We don't see most of reality. We don't hear most of reality, right? On the color spectrum, the sound frequency spectrum, we see less than 1%. So definitely something weird going on out there. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on here. I really do appreciate you. I will put all your links in the bio below for people to check out your book, your website, for them to read on their own and make their own judgments and conclusions on this. But thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.